Good morning, everybody, again, and good Shabbos. And we turn in our prayer books to page 147 as the cantor begins our Shabbat and Yontif service with Shochenat.
Shochenat marom v'kadosh shemo v'chatuv ranenu tzadikim b'Adonai la'yesharim navat tehila בפי ישרים תתהלל, ובדברי צדיקים תתברך, ובלשון חסידים תתרומם, ובקרב קדושים תתקדש, ומקהלות רבבות עמך בית ישראל. להודות, להלל, לשבח, לפעל, לרומם, להדר, לברך, להלל ולקלס, על כל דברי שירות ותשבחות דוד בן ישי עבדך משיחך ישתבח שמך לעד מלכנו. 148 ברכות והודאות ואתה בעד עולם ברוך אתה אדוני אל מלך גדול ותשבחות אל ההודעות אדון הנפלאות הבוחר בשירי זמרה מלך אלוהי העולמים. יתגדל ויתקדש שמי רבה בעלמדי וחירותי בימליך מלכותי חייכון וביומייכון וחיי לכל בית ישראל הגלה ובזמן קריב ואמרו אמן. יהי שמי רבה מברך לעולם ולעולמי הוויה יתברך וישתבח ויתפאר ויתרומם ויתנשא ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתהלל שמי לקודשה בריחו לעילה מכל ברכתה שירתה תושבחתה ונחמתה דמירן בעלמה ואמרו אמן. ברכו את אדוני המבורך ברוך אדוני המבורך לעולם ועד. ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם יוצר אור ובורא חושך עושה שלום ובורא את הכל.
And you may be seated.
Page 151. אל אדון על כל המעשים ברוך ומבורך בפי כל נשמה גודלו וטובו מלא עולם דעת ותבונה סובבים אותו המתגאה על חיות הקודש ונדר בכבוד על המרכבה זכות ומישור לפני חיסור חסד ורחמים לפני כבודו טובים מאורות שברא אלוהינו יצרם בדעת בבינו והשכל כוח וגבורה נתן בהם להיות מושלים בקרב תבל מלאים זיו ומפיקים נוגה נאה זיום בכל העולם שמחים בצאתם וששים בבואם עושים באימה רצון קונם ועד וכבוד נותנים לשמו צהלה ורינה לזכר מלכותו קרא לשמש ויזרח אור ראה והתקין צורת הלבנה שבח שבח נותנים לו כל צבא מרום תפארת וגדולה שרפים ואופנים וחיות הקודש. תתברך מושנו על שבח מעשה ידיך, ועל מאור יור, שעשית יפרוך הסלע. 153. וכולם פותחים את פיהם בקדושה ובטהרה, בשירה ובזמרה ובזמרה, ומברכים ומשבחים, ומפארים ומעריצים, ומקדישים וממליכים. להקדיש ליוצרם בנחת רוח, בשפה ברורה ובנימה קדושה, כולם כאחד עונים ואומרים ביראה, קדוש 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 אדוני צבאות, מלוך כל הארץ כבודו. והפנים בעין הקודש בלש גדול מתנשאים לעומת שרפים, לעומת המשבחים ואומרים, ברוך כבוד אדוני במקומו. אור חדש על ציון תאיר, ונזכה כולנו מהרה לאורו. ברוך אתה אדוני יוצר המאורות. Middle of 154. Vavienu לשלום וארבע כנפות הארץ, ותוליכנו קוממיות לארצנו, כי אל פועל ישועות אתה, ובנו בחרת מכל עם ולשון, לשמך גדול סלע סלע. באמת להודות לך ולייחדך באהבה. ברוך אתה אדוני הבוחר בעמו ישראל באהבה. We join together, page 155, to Shema. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Ve'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha, b'chol levavecha, u'b'chol nafshecha, u'b'chol me'odecha, והיו הדברים האלה אשר אנוכי מצווך היום על לבבך, ושיננתם לבניך ודיברת בם, ושבתך בביתך ובלכתך בדרך ובשוכבך ובקומך, וקשרתם לאות על ידיך, והיו לטוטפות בין עיניך, וכתבתם על מזוזות ביתך ובשעריך. Continue silently, page 156. For those of you wearing a talit, it's time to take the fourth seat in the corners, join them together, and join in with me in the middle of the page. Vayomer Adonai el Moshe lemor daber el bnei Yisrael v'amarta aleihem ve'asu lahem tzitzit al kanfei bigdehem ledorotam v'natnu al tzitzit hakanaf betil techelet והיה לכם לציצית, וריתם אותו, וזכרתם את כל מצוות אדוני, ועשיתם אותם, ולא תטורו אחרי לבבכם, ואחרי עיניכם, אשר אתם זונים אחריהם, למען תזכרו ועשיתם את כל מצוותיי, והייתם קדושים לאלוהיכם, אני אדוני אלוהיכם, אשר הוצאתי אתכם מארץ מצרים להיות לכם לאלוהים, אני אדוני אלוהיכם, אדוני אלוהיכם אמן. עודנו מצילנו מעולם שמך, אין אלוהים זולתך. עזרת אבותינו אתה הוא מעולם. Middle of 158. משה ומרים ובני ישראל הכנו שירה בשמחה רבה, ואמרו כולם, מי כמוך בערים אדוני, מי כמוך נדר בקודש, נורא תהילות עושה פלא. שירה חדשה שיבחו גאונים, לשמך על שפת הים, יחד כולם עודו והמליכו ואמרו, אדוני ימלוך לעולם ועד.
Please rise.
צבוד ישראל, קומה בעזרת ישראל, ולפני חינומך יהודה וישראל, גואלנו אדוני צבאות שמו, קדוש ישראל. ברוך אתה אדוני גאל ישראל. We join together special Amidah for the Chag, page 309.
306.
Baruch 306. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu ve'Elohei Avotenu, Elohei Avraham, Elohei Yitzchak, ve'Elohei Yaakov, Elohei Sarah, Elohei Rivka, Elohei Rachel, ve'Elohei Leah, ha'el הגדול הגיבור והנורא אל עליון, גומל חסדים טובים מקונה הכל, וזוכר חסדי אבות, ומבין גואל לבני בניהם, למען שמו באהבה. מלך עוזר ופוקד ומושיע ומגן, ברוך אתה אדוני, מגן אברהם ופוקד שרה. אתה גיבור לעולם אדוני, מחיי מתים אתה, רב להושיע. מחלקי חיים בחסד, מחיי מתים ברחמים רבים, סומך נופלים ורופא חולים, ומתיר אסורים, ומקיים אמונתו נשעני עפר. מי כמוך בגבורות ומי דומה לך, הלך ממית ומחיה ומצמיח ישועה, ונאמן אתה להחיות מתים. ברוך אתה אדוני מחיי המתים. 308. נקדש את שמך בעולם, כשם שמקדישים אותו בשמי מרום, ככתוב על יד נביאך, וקרא זה לזה ואמר, קדוש 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 אדוני צבאות, מלוא כל הארץ כבודו. אז בקול רעש גדול, אדיר וחזק משמיעים בקול, מתנשאים לעומת שרפים, לעומתם ברוך יאמרו, ברוך כבוד אדוני ממקומו. ממקומך מלכנו תופיע, ותמלוך עלינו, כי מחכים אנחנו לך. מתי תמלוך בציון, וקרוב בימינו לעולם ועד תשכון. תתגדל ותתקדש בתוך ירושלים, ירושלים עירך לדור ודור, לדור ודור, ולנצח ולנצח נצחים. בעינינו תראנה מלכותך, כדבר האמור בשירי עוזך, על ידי דוד, על ידי דוד, על ידי דוד, משיח צדקך, ימלוך אדוני לעולם, אלוהיך ציון, לדור ודור, הללויה. לדור ודור נגיד גודלך, ולנצח נצחים קדושתך נקדיש. ושבחך אלוהינו מפינו לא ימוש לעולם ועד, כי אל מלך גדול וקדוש אתה, ברוך אתה אדוני האל הקדוש. We continue silently, pages 309 to 314.
In these last remaining days of Passover, we still celebrate the festival with Hallel. And we turn to page 315. and 16.
Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav, v'tzivanu likro et ha'halel. Hallelujah, hallelujah, Adonai. מקימים מעפר דל מהשפות ירים אביון לא 70 נדיבים עם נדיבי עמו מושיבי עקרת הבית הם אבנים שמחה הללויה בצאת ישראל ממצרים בית יעקב מים לא וויס הייתה ילדה לקודשו ישראל ממשלותיו הים רב וינוס וינוס הירדן ניסוב לאחור ההרים רקדו כאלים גבעות כבני צאן בצאת ישראל ממצרים בית יעקב מעם לא עז מלך הים כי תנוס הירדן תיסוב לאחור ההרים תרקדו חילים גבעות כבני צאן בצאת ישראל ממצרים בית יעקב מעם לא עז מלפני אדון חולי ארץ מלפני אלוה יעקב ההופכי עצור הגמיים חלמיש למים דומיים בצאת ישראל ממצרים בית יעקב מעם לא Middle of the page, 317. Adonai zecharanu yevarech, yevarech et beit Yisrael, yevarech et beit Aaron, yevarech yirei Adonai, הקטנים עם הגדולים, יוסף אדוני עליכם, עליכם ועל בניכם, ברוכים אתם לאדוני. עושה שמיים וארץ, השמיים שמיים לאדוני, והארץ נתן לבני אדם, לא המתים יהללויה, ולא כל יורדי דומה, ואנחנו נברך יה, מעתה ועד עולם, מעתה ועד עולם. Middle of 318. Mashiv l'Adonai, kol tagmulo hi alai. נדרה על אדוני שלם נגדנה לכל עמו, בחצרות בית אדוני, בתוכך ירושלים. Hallelujah. Top of 319. Hallelujah et Adonai, kol goyim shabechu, shabechu, kol ha'olim, ki gavar aleinu, aleinu chasdo, ve'emet Adonai le'olam. Adonai ki tov ki leolam chasto ki leolam chasto yomarna Yisrael חסדו, כי לעולם חסדו. יאמרו נא וטהרון, כי לעולם חסדו. יאמרו נא ירא אדוני, כי לעולם חסדו. Top of page 320. פיתחו לי שערי צדק, אבוב עמודיה. זה השער לאדוני, צדיקים יבואו בו. הולך כי עניתני באתי לי לישועה. הולך כי עניתני באתי לי לישועה. אבן מסו הבונים הייתה לראש פינה. אבן מסו הבונים הייתה לראש פינה. מיד אדוני הייתה זאת, היא נפלאת בינינו. מיד אדוני הייתה זאת, היא נפלאת בינינו. זה היום עשה אדוני, נגילה ונשמחה בו. זה היום עשה אדוני, נגילה ונשמחה בו. אנא אדוני הושיענה. אנא אדוני הושיענה. אנא אדוני הצליחנה. אנא אדוני הצליחנה. Top of page 321. כי לך טוב להודות ושמך נא לזמר, כי מעולם עד עולם אתה אל. ברוך אתה אדוני מלך מהולל, בתשבחות.
And you may be seated now as we continue with the Kaddish Shalom, back on page 167.
יגדל ויתקדש שמי רבה, בעלמדי ובחירותי, בימיך מלכותי, בחייכון ובמכון ובחיים כל בית ישראל, הגלה בזמן קריב, ואמרו אמן. יהי שמי רבה מברך, לעלם ולעלמי עלמיה, יתברך וישתבח ויתפאר ויתרומם ויתנשא, ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתהלל, שמי לקודשה בריחו. לעילם יקום לכדה ושירתה, ושברתה ונחמתה, דאמירן בעלמא, ואמרו אמן. תתקבל צלותון ובאותון לכל ישראל, קודם אבון ושמיה, ואמרו אמן. יש שלמה רבה מן שמיה, וחיים עלינו על כל ישראל, ואמרו אמן. עושה שלום במרומיו, הוא יעשה שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל, ואמרו amen.
We're now ready to begin our Torah service for this Shabbat in this seventh day of Passover. We turn now to page 168, and the cantor begins at the very top of the page, Ein Kamocha.
Ein kamocha v'Elohim Adonai, ואין כמעשיך, מלכותך מלכות כל עולמים, וממשלתך בכל דור ודור. אדוני מלך, אדוני מלך, אדוני מלוך לעולם. Adonai ozeamo itein, Adonai evarech et amo v'shalom, avar rachamim metiv aviltzoncha et Zion, tivne chomot Yerushalayim, tivne chomot Yerushalayim, ki v'chalevan badachnu, melech el ram v'nisa Adon olamim.
Please rise.
Vayehi min Aharon, vayomer Moshe, Kuma Adonai, veyafutzu oevecha, veyonusu mesanecha mitpanecha, ki mitzion tetzei Torah, ki mitzion tetzei Torah, ulevar Adonai mirushalayim, Baruch shenatan Torah le'amo, Baruch shenatan Torah le'amo, le'amo Yisrael bigdushato. 170. Narachitz v'lishme kadisha kadisha yakira anahem hartush bechan yehera avakodamach detiv dachlibi beoraita betashlim mishalin delibi v'liba dechol amach Yisrael לטבול חיים ולשלם אמן. שמע ישראל אדוני אלוהינו אדוני אחד. אחד אלוהינו גדול אדוננו קדוש שמו. גדול אדוני איתי ונרוממה שמו יחדיו. לך אדוני הגדול הגדולה והנפארת והנצח וההוד.
And you may be seated. It's great to see so many of you here this morning as we celebrate the seventh day of Passover and Shabbat. And there's a special Torah reading that we do on this seventh day of Passover, even if it falls on Shabbat. And that's found on page 399 in our Eitz Chaim and our Torah commentaries. And as you will see now, our people, the people of Israel, we celebrated just 7 days ago, last Saturday night, when our people were finally able to leave Egypt. And now 7 days later, as we approach this day, and as our ancestors approach this day, they approached the Sea of Reeds. They were free, and yet they seemed trapped. They had a sea in front of them and the Egyptian army chasing from behind them. I thought they were going to be free. What would happen here? How would they escape? And we'll read that today, of course, the greatest miracle, one of the greatest miracles of all time, and the greatest miracle, one of the greatest miracles that our people have ever experienced, of course, the parting of the Sea of Reeds. So we'll read that in just a moment, but I want to point out something at the very beginning of this Torah portion. And it coincides with Parsha Bishalach, which is found on top of page 399. It's something we sometimes forget in the midst of the Exodus story. I don't think it's mentioned in the Haggadah either, but it's something very interesting. In the midst of all the chaos of getting ready to leave, imagine the fear that the people had. They didn't even have time to allow their bread to rise. They were packing up all their things to go in this journey through the Sinai, to leave Egypt finally after 4 centuries of slavery. And Moses, in the middle of all that chaos, remembers something very important, a promise made by those who've gone before him, to not just pack up his goods to make sure they had food and water, but to bring out the bones of Joseph from Egypt, to carry them with them all the way and bury them eventually in the land of Israel. A promise that had been kept for centuries. Remember Joseph, going back to the stories in Genesis, it was Joseph who in many ways was Egyptian, right? He married an Egyptian woman. He dressed like an Egyptian. He was second in charge of Egypt. And yet on his deathbed, we remember from the end of the book of Genesis, he tells his children, don't forget to bring up my bones from here. Make this solemn oath that I won't remain in Egypt. When that time comes and when our people eventually return to our homeland, you'll bring my bones with you to make sure they're buried in its proper place. There are many great explanations of why this is so important and how this oath is continued for centuries. But one I like is a reminder that no matter how Egyptian we may become or how American we may become, our roots are still back into that ancient land on the shores of the Mediterranean, going back to where our ancestors came from. And Joseph realized this, that he didn't want to forever be in Egypt. He wanted to make sure that his descendants, those who would come after him, would remember that oath to eventually bring him out and bury him in the land of Israel. No matter how American we may be, do we still keep that connection to the land of Israel? And whether we decide to be buried there or not, do we visit? Do we support? Do we advocate for the modern state of Israel? Now let's continue to read this story, the most important of all stories, the culmination of our freedom from Egypt. What will happen now as we approach the Sea of Reeds? Top of page 399, and we're honored to have our Yad Squad reader, Corby. Thank you always for being here, and to see your wife, Gail, and we hope your baby, Moses, which is appropriately named for this holiday, is doing okay back at home. Page 399.
Baruch Adonai Hamvarach.
Baruch Adonai Hamvarach le'olam va'ed.
Baruch Adonai Hamvarach le'olam va'ed. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam. Asher bachar banu mikol ha'amim v'natan lanu et Torato. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen. Vayehi b'shalach paro et ha'am v'lo nacham Elohim derech eretz pelishtim ki karovu ki amar Elohim pen yinachem ha'am birotam milchama v'shavu mitzrayma Vayasev Elohim et ha'am derech hamidbar yam suf v'hamushim alu b'nei Yisrael me'eretz Mitzrayim vayikach Moshe et atzmot Yosef imo ki hashbeah Hishbia et b'nei Yisrael lemor Hakod yifkod Elohim etchem v'ha'alitem et atzmotai mizeh itchem.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher natan lanu Torah emet v'chayei olam nata b'tochenu Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen. Yamdu Sheni.
Second reading, we're on page 400, verses 20 through 22. The reader is our Beth Yeshurim Balkore, Rabbi Danny Horowitz.
Baruch Adonai Amvarach Le'olam Va'ed. Amen.
Amen. Vayisu misukar ve'achanu ve'tam biktzei hamidbar Adonai holech lifnehem yomam b'amud anan chodam haderech v'layla b'amud eish la'ir lahem la'lechet yomam v'layla lo yamish amun hanan yoman v'amud ha'eish layla lifnei
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher natan lanu Torah
Amen. Yamot Shlishi.
The third reading, page 401, verses 1 through 4 of chapter 14.
Baruch et Adonai Hamvarach.
Baruch Adonai Barach Le'olam Va'ed.
Baruch Adonai Hamvarach Le'olam Va'ed. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher b'charbonu mikol ha'amim v'natan lanu es toraso. Baruch atah Adonai nosein haTorah.
Amen. Vaydaber Adonai al Moshe lemor. Daber al bnei Yisrael. V'yashuvu. V'yachanu lifnei piachirot ben migdol uvein hayam. Lifnei Baal tzafon echechot achanu al hayam. V'yamar paro livnei Yisrael nevuchim meim ba'aretz. Sagar alehem hamidbar. V'chizakti elei paro. V'radaf achareihem. V'kovda b'faro v'chol chelav yadu Mitzrayim ki anu Adonai v'yasu chen.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher natan lanu Torah emet v'chayei olam nata b'sochenu. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen. Talmud Review.
So if you want to see the path of the Exodus, or one of the suggested paths of the Exodus, it's in the back of the Eitz Chaim Chumashim are a bunch of maps. And if you turn to the second map, it shows with the red line there, two possible routes of how the Israelites left Egypt. What's said in the Torah is that they didn't go the direct way, as Rabbi Fort mentioned last night. The shortest route to Israel from where they were was to follow the Mediterranean Sea, just follow the coast all the way up into Israel. But that's not what they did. They went the long way. They went down into the Sinai Desert, wandered around for a while, and then kind of ended up going back up north again. So one of the reasons for that was that there were fortresses all along the Mediterranean coast. And had they gone along the Mediterranean coast, they would have run into groups of soldiers who would have probably taken them back to Egypt. So that was not a good way to go. So they had to go south to avoid those fortresses. And of course, the fortresses were there to protect the coast from invading people. In any case, the other thing you can see there is the Gulf of Suez, which has been highlighted in the news the last couple of weeks because of the big container ship, the Ever Given, which was stuck in the Suez Canal. The Suez Canal was dug from the north of that Gulf of Suez up through to the Mediterranean. So basically, it was stuck in the Red Sea, and of course, it was freed, when else, during Passover. So the Ever Given left Egypt on the Passover holiday. How appropriate. As we now read about the Red Sea. So now we're going to continue the reading.
Baruch et Adonai Hamvorach. Baruch Adonai Hamvorach le'olam va'ed. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher bachar banu mikol hamim v'natan lanu et Torato. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen. Vayigad l'melech Mitzrayim ki baracham v'yehafech. V'aparo v'avadav elam v'yamaru mazod asinu. Yishilachim et Yisrael me'avdeinu. V'yesar et rikba v'yanamalakachimo v'yikach. Sheish me'ot rechev bachur v'kol rechev Mitzrayim v'shalishim al kula. V'yechazek Adonai. Edlei paro melech Mitzrayim, ayir dov, hacharei b'nei Yisrael, v'nei Yisrael, yotzim, b'yad ramah.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher natan lanu Torat emet v'hayei olam nata b'tochenu. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
The fifth Aliyah, we're on page 402, verses 9 through 14.
Baruch Adonai Hamvorach.
Baruch Adonai Barach le'olam va'ed.
Baruch Adonai Hamvorach le'olam va'ed. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher bachar banu mikol hamim v'notan lanu et Torato. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen. Vayirdefu Mitzrayim achareihem. Vayasigotam chonim alayam. Kol sus rechev paro farshav. V'chelo al piachirod lifnei Baal Tzafon. Ufharo ikriv. Vayisu b'nei Yisrael et eineihem. B'nei Mitzrayim nosei achareihem. Vayiru mod. Vayitzaku b'nei Yisrael el Adonai. Vayomaru el Moshe. Hamibli ein kvareim b'Mitzrayim l'kachter l'amid b'midbar. Mazod asita lanu lo tzianu mi-Mitzrayim. Halo ze hadavar asher dibarnu elecha b'Mitzrayim laimor. Chadal mimenu v'navda Mitzrayim ki tov lanu avod et Mitzrayim mimutenu b'midbar. Vayomer Moshe elam. Al tiru idyatzvu. Uru et Yeshuat Adonai asher yaseh lachem hayom ki asher ritem et Mitzrayim hayom lo tosifu lirotam od ad olam Adonai lachem lachem v'yatem tacharishun.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher notan lanu Torah emes. Hayei olam notah b'sohenu. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen. So naturally, after 10 plagues in Egypt and a miraculous escape from Egypt while the angel of death is attacking the firstborn of the Egyptian, the first thing the Israelites do when they get freedom, of course, they see the Egyptian army coming after them and they're trapped at the Sea of Reeds or the Red Sea. The first thing they do is complain to Moses. Why did you take us out to the desert to die? Can't you see we're going to get killed? We either get drowned in the Red Sea or the Egyptians kill us. We should have stayed in Egypt, remained slaves. And I always wondered how the people could complain. They saw 10 plagues in Egypt. What's the matter with them? Well, today we've experienced the miracle of getting these vaccines in a year. That's unbelievable miracle. And yet there's some people who don't want to take the vaccine. They seem to want to go back to the plagues of Egypt. So here's the point where the Midrash tells us that it was Nachshon ben Aminadav, the head of the tribe of Judah, who jumped into the waters and then sort of in Israeli style said, Acharai, after me, right? And everybody follows him into the water and the water parts. So it required human action to create this miracle. And of course, each one of us has the opportunity to take our own action to get the vaccine and end this plague once and for all. And we could be like Nachshon ben Aminadav and just jump into the water and do it. And now we're going to read about that.
Sixthly, we're on page 403, verses 15 through 25.
Baruch Adonai Hamvorach. Baruch Adonai Hamvorach le'olam va'ed. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher bachar banu mikol hamim v'natan lanu et Torato. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen.
Amen. Vayomer Adonai el Moshe Matitzach Elai Daber El Bnei Yisrael V'Yisa'u V'ata Harem et Matacha Unte et Yatacha Al Hayam Uvka Yehu Vayavohu Bnei Yisrael B'toch Hayam Vayabasha Va'ani Hinani Mechazek et Leif Mitzrayim Vayavohu Acharehem Va'ikavda B'Faro Uvakal Chailal B'Rikba'u Ufarashav V'Yatu Mitzrayim Ki Ani Adonai V'Hikavdi B'Faro B'Rikba'u Ufarashav Vayisa Malach Elohim Hakolech Lifnei Machane Yisrael Vayelech Me'acharehem Vayisa Amud Hanan Mitnehem Vaya'amahot Me'acharehem Vayavo Bein Machane Mitzrayim Uvein Machane Yisrael Vayehi Hanat V'Hachoshech Vaya'er et Hailala V'lo Karav Zeh El Zeh Kol Hailala Vayet Moshe et Yado al Hayam Vayolech Adonai et Hayam Baruch Kadim Azakol Halala Vayasem et Hayam L'Charava Vayibaku Hamayim Vayavohu B'nei Yisrael B'toch Hayam Vayabasha V'hamayim lahem choma mimina u'mispalaham Vayirdafu Mitzrayim vayavahu acharehem kol susparo richba ufarashav el toch hayam vayehi ba'ashmoret haboker vayashkev Adonai el machane Mitzrayim ba'amud esh va'anan vayaham Eit Machane Mitzrayim Vayasar Eit Ofan Marchavotav Vaina Hagehu Bichvedud Vayomer Mitzrayim Anusa Mipnei Yisrael Ki Adonai Nilcham Lahem B'Mitzrayim.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher natan lanu Torah emet v'chayei olam nata b'tochenu. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen. Now we'll do a prayer for those who are ill among our congregation, their family and friends. If you have a name that you would like to add, you can mention that name at your seat, or if you're watching online, mention that name as well. I have a list of names that I will also read of people that we know who are ill and in need of a special blessing. Mi sheberach avotenu Avraham Yitzhak v'Yaakov v'imotenu Sarah Rivka Rachel v'Leah hu yivarech v'yarpeh cholim ha'ela. May the God of our ancestors Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Sarah, Rebekah, Rachel, and Leah grant blessing and healing to the following members of our congregation, their family, and friends. Abraham Eliyahu ben Chaim, Avraham Yitzchak ben Chaim, Bina bat Teresia, Bracha bat Nechama, Chavale Lila bat Shendel v'David, Chayalea bat Malia Rachel, Chaim Yehuda bat ben Rachel, Eli ben Devorah, Esther Menucha bat Anya, Miriam Esther bat Razel, Moshe David ben Freudel, Moshe David ben Rachel, Reuven ben Shoshana, Shendel Michal bat Leah v'Yakov, Shoshana bat Irma, Shoshana Bracha bat Shendel v'David, Surah Golda bat Malka, Yehudit Dina bat Refuel v'Niva Rivka, Yocheved Leah bat Elki v'Michal, Yosef Velvel ben Chayachana, Zahara Aviva bat Harav Moshe Reuven v'Harav Rachel, Hak Borlin, Marion Brown, Nora Joachim Brown, Zelda Brown, Judith Cohen, David Danberg, Jerry Danberg, Lisa Fleischman, Candace Siegel Gilman, Mark Gold, Toby Gold, Richard Lamb, Kim Levin, Steve Levine, Kimberly Mariner, Dorothy Marr, Carla Miller, Bill Morgan, Floyd Nichols, Rhonda Johnson Pickett, Lex Rosenbaum, Ronald Sackheim, Julie Scheinthal, Barbara Selzer, Diane and Richard Shapiro, Misi, Mark and Jeffrey Shapiro, Paul Silvestri, Fran Spector, Michael Weingart, and Aaron Khariati, Bela Bach-Grinzel Pearl, Bill Gregory, Bill Turner, Billy Layden, Chana Batzvi, Daniel Ben Shulamit, Don Kobos, Eliezer Ben Esther Gittel, George Noon, Garrett Hohendorf, Haskell Ben Clara, Herschel Chaim Ben Hana, Israel Ben Gittel, Janeel Kaiser, Margalit Bat Tanya, Fong Mai Tifam, Rex Marco, Sarah Bat Yehudit, Sarah Gittel Bat Freda, Shana Liba Bat Esther, Shana Chana Bat Tova Rose, Shmuel Ben Rosemary, Yosef Ben Mala, and Yosef Chaim Ben Adina, and all Vet Shara Cholim Ha'ela, all the sick members of our congregation, their family and friends. May God grant them blessing and healing, and may God grant their doctors and caretakers wisdom and insight to helping them to heal and get stronger and healthier. And to all of this, may we say Amen. We're about to read the 7th Aliyah, and after the first few verses, we're going to all stand up because we're going to do the song at the sea. So, Mi Chamocha Ba'elim Adonai, we do twice every day in the Jewish prayers, but when we read it from the Torah, we read it with a special melody, not the usual Torah chanting trope. So we will hear the Song of the Sea and imagine that we ourselves are standing at the Red Sea, preparing to cross, or having crossed the sea, and experiencing our victorious freedom from slavery. We'll stand with our ancestors.
The reader for the 6th Aliyah was another member of the Odd Squad, Michael Richker. As the rabbi said, we're now going to read a very special section. We're on page 405, verse 26 of chapter 14 through verse 26 of chapter 15. I will signal you when to rise.
Baruch Adonai Hamvarach.
Baruch Adonai Hamvarach Leolam Vaed.
Baruch Adonai Hamvarach Leolam Vaed. Baruch Ata Adonai Eloheinu Melech Haolam Asher Bacharbanu Mikol Ha'amim V'natan Lanu Et Torato. Baruch Ata Adonai Noten HaTorah.
Amen.
Amen. Vayomer Adonai El Moshe Netei et Yadcha al Hayam. Vayashu Mayim al Mitzrayim al Rechbo Yab Harashav. Vayed Moshe et Yado al Hayam. Vayashev Hayam Lifnat Boker Leitano Mitzrayim Nasim Likrato. Vayaner Adonai Mitzrayim Betok Hayam. Vayashuvu Amayim Yechasu et Arechav Yerabarashim L'chol Chel Paro Aba'im Achreihem Bayam Unishar Bahem Arechad Uvenei Yisrael Alchu Bayabashah Betok Hayam V'Hamayim Lam Chama Miminam Mismalam Vayosh Adonai Bayam Hahu Et Yisrael Miyad Mitzrayim Vayar Yisrael Mitzrayim made us Sfat Hayam. Vayar Yisrael et Hayad Hagdolah. Asher Asad Adonai b'Mitzrayim. Vayiruham et Adonai. Vayaminu b'Adonai. Uv'Moshe Avdo. Az Yashir Moshe. Uv'nei Yisrael. Rashiraz Adonai, Vayamaru Laimor, Ashiranai Kigaga, Sesvarachva Ramavayam, Ozivazimadya Vahili Lishua, Zeli Vianavehu, Elohei Avi, Varam Manhu. Adonai Ishmael Chama, Adonai Shema, Markavot Paro V'chelo Yarav Hayam, Umivchar Shel Yishav Tubu B'yam Suf Tomot Yirasim Yodud V'im Tzalot Kamo Aven, Yemincha Adonai Nedari B'Koach, Yemincha Adonai Teratzo Yev, V'rov Gon Chataros Kamecha, Shalacharon Chayach Leimakash, Uvrach Abechanem Umayim Nitzvu Kamod Nedoslim Kafu Damo Belev Yam Amar Oyevedo Vasi Gachalek Shalal Timlo Emanavshi Ari Chari Tori Shemayadi Nashaftaru Ruchakaki Samu Yam Saladu Koferet Bemayim Adirim Michamocha Bailim Adonai Michamocha Nerabakadesh Ilado Seifel Nati Tayamin Khativim Arets Nakid Vachastram Zugalta Nealta Vios Kolome Kochecha Shamuamim Yagazun Kilachas Yoshve Pelashet Azni Valefeedam Elemoav Yokose Morad Namo Guko Yoshve Hanan Tipol Alayam Madavafachad Big Dol Zaroacha Yidmu Kaven Ad Yavoram Chadonai, Ad Yavoram Zukanita, to the aim of Titaim Abar Nachalatcha, Lachon Shiv Ticha Paltaranai, Mikdash Adonai Kalinu Yadecha, Adonai Imloch Leolam Vaed, Kiva, Susparo B'Richvo Rasha Bayam, Hayam Shevaranai Alehem et Mei Hayam Uvnei Yisrael Alchu Bayam Shabbato Hayam Vatikach Miriam Anavia Achot Aron Atov Biada Vatetzena Kol Anashim Achareha Vatupim Avim Cholot Vatan Lahem Miriam Shirul Adonai Kigoga Sesvarachva Ramavayam Vayasam Moshe et Yisrael miyam suva yitzu amidbar shur Vayelchu shloshet yamim bamidbar v'lo matzu mayim Vayavo marad avirach lulishtot mayim imadra kimarim hem al ken karashma marha Vayilon nuham Almost shalemor manishte Vayitzak el Adonai Vayarei Adonai Yetz Vayashlech el Amayim Vayim Tiku Hamayim Sham Samlo Choku Mishpat V'Sham Nisau Vayomer Im Shamoa Tishma L'Kol Adonai Elohecha Vayashar B'Yonata Sevazan Tel Mitzvotav V'Shamarta Kol Kukav Kol Amachala Asher Samti B'Mitzrayim Lo Asim Alecha Ki Ani Adonai Rofecha.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher natan lanu Torah emet v'chayei olam nata betochenu Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen.
We rise for Chatzi Kaddish.
Yitkada v'yitkada shemei Rabbah Ve'alma divrah kirutei ve'amlich malchutei V'chayechon uv'yamechon uv'chaye dechol beit Yisrael Bagala bagala uv'izman kariv v'yimru amen Yehi shmei Rabbam mevarach Ya'olam l'meil maya Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitbar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh v'yitadar v'yitalev v'yitalal Shmei d'kudusha b'richu L'yelam min kol birchata v'shirata Tushbechata v'nechemata Amiran v'yalma v'yimru Amen Yamdu amag v'vagalel let l'sefer rishon Asher Moshe Lifnei Bnei Yisrael Al Pi Adonai B'yad Moshe Torah, 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 Torah Torah Tziva Lanu Moshe Torah, 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 Torah Torah Tziva Lanu Moshe
Torah, 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 Tziva lanu Moshe. Torah, 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 Tziva lanu Moshe. You may be seated. So we're taking out a second Torah scroll for the Maftir Aliyah. As is typically done on the festivals, we read a selection from the Torah that deals with the holiday, and most of the time that's taken from the Torah portion Pinchas, which is found in the book of Numbers. And that's exactly what we're going to do right now. So we're going to turn to page 932 in the middle of the Torah portion of Pinchas, chapter 28. We're going to read about the festival of Passover as it's described in Pinchas.
Yamod Maftir.
We call upon Michael Richker.
Baruch Hu et Adonai HaMvarach.
Baruch Adonai Baruch Le'olam Va'ed.
Baruch Adonai HaMvarach Le'olam Va'ed. Baruch Ata Adonai Eloheinu Melech Olam Asher Bachar Banu Mikol Hamim V'natan Lanu et Torato. Baruch Ata Adonai Noten HaTorah.
Amen.
V'hikrivtem Isha Olat Ladonai Pari B'nei Vakar Shanayim V'ayil Echad V'shivat Chavasim B'nei Shana Tamimim Yehiyu Lachem U'min Chatam Solep B'lula B'shaman Shalosha Esronim Lapar U'shnei Esronim La'ayil Ta'asu Isaron Ta'aseh L'keves Echad L'shivat Akbasim Us'ir Chatat Echad L'kaper Aleichem Milvad Olat HaBoker Asher L'Allah HaTamid Ta'asu Et Hele Ka'ele ta'asu layom shivat yamin lechem Ishei reach nechoach la'adonai Al olah tatamid yeyasef v'nizko Uvayom hashvi'i mikra kodesh yihayel lachem Kol malakat avodat lo ta'asu Baruch Ata Adonai Eloheinu Melech Olam Asher Notan Lanu Torah Emet V'chayei Olam Natat B'tochenu Baruch Ata Adonai Noten HaTorah.
Amen. Yamdu amag b'yavagalel l'sefer sheni. B'zot ha'torah
Sa Moshe Lifnei B'nei Yisrael Al Pi Adonai. Torah, 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 Tziva lanu Moshe. Torah, 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 Torah tziva lanu Moshe. Torah, 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 Torah. Torah tziva lanu Moshe. Torah, 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 Torah. Torah tziva lanu Moshe. You may be seated. So the Haftarah is a special one for the seventh day of Passover. It's found on page 1311 in our Eitz Chaim Chumashim. It is taken from the second book of Samuel, chapter 22. So we read the Song of the Sea for the Torah portion, and so the connection with the Haftarah is a Song of David. The Song of the Sea was after the final triumph of God over the Egyptians and their army. And so the children of Israel sang a song of triumph and victory. And now King David sings a song of victory in his final days before he passes the kingship on to his son Solomon. And he is thankful to God for having won so many victories. I just want to note one thing in the commentary on page 1310. Of the terms used in the Haftarah for God's invincible protection, none stands out as much as the word tzur, which means rock. It's used over and over again. And what is a rock except God, says David? Steadfast mountain rocks offered a metaphor for inviolable stability, eternity, and great geologic forces erupting heavenward. And so it's kind of, you imagine not just a little tiny rock, but a huge kind of mountainous rock. And that's the kind of rock that David has in mind. However, one of the reasons that we put little rocks on memorial markers at gravestones at cemeteries is because of this idea that one of God's names is Tzur, a rock. And so in sort of symbolic sense, we put a rock symbolizing God's presence on the memorial markers when we visit a grave. Also, they're more permanent. In any case, here David calls God a rock several times, and as it also says in the commentary there, this poem, this song, is also found in the book of Psalms as Psalm 18. So now we'll hear a portion of chapter 22, page 1311.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher bachar b'nvi'im tovim, v'ratzah v'divrei hanemarim be'emet, Baruch atah Adonai. Habocher b'Torah uf Moshe avdo, uf Yisrael amo, uf v'nvi'ei hamet v'tzedek. V'daber David l'Adonai et divrei hashira hazot b'yom hatzil Adonai alto mikaf kol oivav umivkaf sha'um. Vayomar Adonai sal'i sorati fachili Elohei suri echesep bo Makini v'keren yishi Miskapi nusei Moshe Mechama toshi eini Mechula ekrai Adonai Me'oivai Ivashea ki afafuni Mishmeri mahaved Achalei v'liya Yava'atuni Chevle shahur Sabuni, keep muni, Moshe Mafet, but Sarli Ekra Adonai, Elohai, Ekra, Bayishma Meha, Chachlok Holy, Beshavati, Ba'aznav, Bayikash, Fatir Ash Haaretz, Mosdod Hashamayim Yirgasu, Bayigash Shu, Ki Charalo, Allah Ashan Ba'amo, Ba'esh Mipi Tochel, Yachalim Ba'aru Mimenu, Yeh Shamayim Vayeh Raha, Ba'arafel, Tachat Raglov. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, sur chol ha'olamim, tzaddik b'chol hadorot, ha'el ha'ne'eman, ha'omer v'yoseh, ha'mdaber kayem, shekol devarav, emet v'tzedek. Ne'eman atahu Adonai Eloheinu, v'ne'emanim devarecha, v'davar echad midvarecha, achor lo yashuv rekam, ki el melech ne'eman, v'rachaman ata baruch ata Adonai. Ha'el ha'ne'eman b'chol devarav. Rachaim al Sion ki hi beit chayenu, vala aluvat nefesh toshia, bimheira v'yameinu, baruch ata Adonai, mesameach Sion b'vanecha. Sabcheinu Adonai Eloheinu, be'eliyahu hanavi avdecha, ufmalkuchut beit David mashichecha, Bimheira yafo v'yagel libenu al kisolo yeshev zar v'lo yichalu od acherim et kavodo ki v'shem kodshacha nishbatalo shelo yichbe nero le'olam va'ed baruch ata Adonai Magen David. Al Torah, v'al ha'avodah, v'al hanvi'im, v'al yom chag hamatzot hazeh, shenatata lanu, Adonai Eloheinu, l'sason u'simcha, l'chavod u'tifaret. Al ha'kol Adonai Eloheinu, anachnu modim lach, u'mvarchim otach, yitbarach shimcha b'fikal chai. Tamid le'olam ba'ed, baruch ata Adonai, makadesh ha'shabbat, baruch ata Adonai, makadesh Yisrael v'ha'azmanim.
Michael, thank you. It's always a pleasure to have you read Torah and to do the Haftarah. Please give our best to Vicky, and it's great to see you. And now we call upon our congregational president, Jared Bloom, to lead us in a prayer for the United States and Israel.
Almighty God on high, omnipotent King, look down from your heavenly abode and bless the United States of America. May our leaders strive to establish justice and opportunity for all, and may they be successful in bringing peace to the family of nations. May you favor rest upon our beloved state of Israel, its land, and all those who dwell therein. Protect Israel from war and hatred, and may our Jewish state bring comfort to those who seek refuge, light to those who dwell in darkness, and new hope to all humanity. We ask your blessings upon the valiant servicemen and women of the American military forces and the Israel Defense Forces, who risk their lives to protect the welfare of all your creation. Be their shelter and fortress, and do not allow them to falter. Fill their hearts with faith and courage. Protect them on land, in the air, and on the sea. Guide them in peace, lead them toward peace, and return them speedily to their families, alive and unharmed. And let us together say, Amen.
Now we return to our prayer books, and we turn to page 181, and we're honored to have next week's bar mitzvah, Eli Gross, to lead us in the Ashrei.
Ashrei Yoshvei Veitecha, Odi Halelucha Selam. Tehila LeDavid, Aramimcha Elohai HaMelech, Va'avarcha Shimcha Le'olam Va'ed. Gadol Adonai Umhila Me'od, Veli Gdulato Ein Cheker. Hadar Kevod Hodecha, Vedivrei Niflotecha Asicha. Zecher Rav Tucha Yabiu, Vesidkatcha Yiranenu.
Anu Brachum Adonai, Erik Alpayim Kol Chasem.
Tov Adonai Lako, ורחמיו על כל מעשיו. כבוד מלכותך יאמרו, וגבורתך ידברו. מלכותך מלכות כל עולמים, וממשלתך בכל דור ודור. עיני כל אליך יסברו, ואתה נותן להם את אוכלם בעיתו. צדיק אדוני בכל דרכיו, וחסיד בכל מעשיו. רצון יראיו יעשה, ואת שבתם ישמע ויושיעם. תהילת אדוני ידבר פי, ויברך כל בשר שם קודשו לעולם ועד. ואנחנו נברך יה מעתה ועד עולם. Hallelujah. Thank you. Good job.
We rise. יעללו את שם אדוני כי נשגב שמו לבדו. הודו על ארץ ושמיים וירם קרן לעמו. תהילה לכל חסידיו לבני ישראל עם קרובו. הללויה. השיבנו אדוני אליך ונשובה. חדש חדש ימינו. חדש ימינו
You may be seated. And for our Devar Torah this morning, we're honored to have Kevin Lefkowitz with us. As you know, Kevin grew up here at Congregation Beth Yeshurun, and he's studying to be a rabbi at the Ziegler School of Rabbinic Studies in Los Angeles. Kevin's just finishing up his 4th year. It's hard to believe. There's 1 year left. He'll be spending the fall semester in Israel, and then next spring you'll be graduating just a little over a year from now. So hopefully you got to pass. Got to pass. I remember those final exams. They're not easy. But Kevin, it's an honor to have you here, address the congregation. It's a pleasure to have your grandmother here, your proud parents, and your girlfriend, Melissa. Melissa is studying to be a rabbi at Hebrew Union College in Los Angeles, and she'll also be joining you in Israel this fall. So it's a pleasure to have you here as well, Melissa. So again, Kevin, thank you for being here. We now look forward to your Devar Torah.
Why do we need Passover? Do we celebrate this holiday out of tradition or ritual, or is there an additional value that we get about talking about freedom for 8 days every year? Come to think of it, what is freedom? To answer these rhetorical questions, I'd like to spend a minute on a Talmudic machloket, or debate, that analyzes the formulation of the Seder and how our ancient rabbis viewed our people's origin story. In the Talmud, in Tractate Psachim 116a, we read about the order of the Seder and that we are supposed to matchil bignut umesayem b'shevach, to begin with disgrace and end with praise. Ending with praise makes sense. We praise God for redeeming the people, taking us out of Egypt. But what is gnut? Disgrace. Two rabbis, Rav and Shmuel, had the same question, and indeed debate what we're really supposed to begin with in the story. What is gnut? Rav says to begin with gnut means to begin the storytelling portion of the Haggadah by stating that our ancestors were once idol worshippers, and now we follow the Torah. We follow God. His counterpart Shmuel said no. It literally means that we are once slaves in bondage and God freed us, and that's the trajectory of the story. But I think this is more than a debate about what to say at the Seder, but rather what does freedom mean? Rav believes in a mental freedom, freedom of the mind. What made the Israelites a distinct people was the idea that we follow God and an emphasis on values found in the Torah. While we once listened and followed the intellectual and philosophical beliefs of the time and the people around us, we now have the ability to think for ourselves. We used to be idol worshipers. Now we have a unique sense of purpose that guides our lives. We are free to think what we want. Shmuel argues that the story is a matter of physical freedom. Once we were slaves in Egypt, but God took us out of bondage and gave us the ability to determine our own fate. The Israelites became a people at Sinai because we accepted the Torah, and we only could have gotten there once we escaped the shackles of Egyptian bondage. Now we have the freedom to do what we want. And of course, both opinions are found in the Haggadah today because both are integral to what makes a person free. And I am unfortunately here to tell you that even though we live in the United States of America, where freedom rings, we are indeed not free. We enjoy the physical freedom that Shmuel talks about. We can pray and we can live as we wish, and we can even use technology to connect us with people all around the world. But that very technology has us trapped in a sort of modern Egypt, in an example of the mental slavery that Rav feared. Netflix released a documentary last year called The Social Dilemma, in which experts discuss the dangers social media has brought into our lives, and dangers they know very well because they created them. And without spoiling anything, I think you should see it for yourselves. These experts discuss what's called persuasive technology, and this is something my sister actually took a class on at A&M, called persuasive technology, and how engineers tap into human psychology to predict and then influence human behavior. For example, companies designed apps to trigger our deeply wired responses to keep us glued to our phones. So you know how you have to slide the phone in a downward motion to check if you have any new emails or new Instagram posts, and sometimes it'll pop up and sometimes it doesn't. What does that remind you of? They do this to maximize the amount of time that we stay on the app. So we see the advertisements, and that's how they make money. It's a business. And it may be free for us to use, but as they say in the documentary, if you're not paying for the product, then you are the product. In the documentary, it says there are only two industries that call their customers users: illegal drugs and software. That's no coincidence. And while I was just told that the term for users is older than social media, I think it still fits. These companies find patterns in our behavior and then, by means of suggestion, push inflammatory articles on us without a way to fact-check these articles. To take advantage of the limited amount of time that our ever-shortening attention span allows, websites, talk radio, and news sources are becoming increasingly biased to cater to what they believe the reader wants to, or listener wants to, or is most likely to read or hear. After all, when it comes to the internet, we're most likely to notice and see ads on inflammatory information. And the more we read this inflammatory information and click, the more in our bubble of political views, the more polarized we become. It's a downward spiral. I tested it recently and typed a particular news source and a headline. I was looking for a specific article on a source that I don't typically read into Google. The first 8 sources, the first 8 results were articles written about that news source, and the rest of the first page were articles written by other sites on that certain topic. I was literally looking for a specific article and I couldn't find it on Google. That is why we need the annual Seder and Passover, because we're not really free. German poet and philosopher Johann von Goethe once pointed out that, quote, "None are more hopelessly enslaved than those who falsely believe they are free." We believe we have control over our lives and behavior because we have the physical freedom but we don't have as much control as we think because we lack Rob's freedom of the mind. We think what we are pushed to think and therefore do what we are pushed to do. Now for the solution. Our solution is in a prayer that we say every day, Aleinu. Literally translated to on us, this prayer tells us that it is our obligation to pray to God and create the world in which we wish to live. It might seem counterintuitive to tell an enslaved people that it's on them to free themselves, but as stated before, this is a different type of slavery. Because slavery of the mind works differently than slavery of the body, it requires a different path to freedom. It is aleinu, it is on us to examine ourselves and look for actions that we take that don't necessarily match our values. And perhaps most importantly, to listen when other people point it out for us. When other people identify the ways that we might be trapped in a mental slavery, we have the responsibility to free ourselves by hearing them out and acting accordingly. I learned this from Dr. Rex Marco, who spoke at Beth Yeshurun a few months ago when Rabbi Strauss interviewed him. And after becoming quadriplegic after a tragic bicycle accident, Dr. Marco called on everyone to put ourselves into the shoes of the other. He asked those of us who are able-bodied to consider what it might be like not to have the ability to walk down a flight of stairs or to navigate public transportation, a lot of which is inaccessible. Rabbi Strauss quoted the words of Dr. Oliver Sacks, who called on us not to see people for what they can't do as a hindrance, but rather what they can do as children of God. Dr. Marco recognized that these things are difficult. He admittedly struggles with them himself, but charged us all with the task to do our best to listen when people ask for help, that what they're doing is shining a light on a spot that we might not have previously seen. Rabbi David Wolpe of Sinai Temple in Los Angeles argues that societal rules only have power over those who don't know they exist. But once we identify them, then we are halfway to overcoming them. I believe this also applies to slavery of the mind. What it means to be mentally free is to accept the paradoxical notion that mental slavery is both inevitable and only effective when people don't see it or they deny it. So while we come to the end of this Passover holiday of freedom, I want to leave us with the charge of action. Look at the way that other people influence you. Celebrate the physical freedom that we have, but be open to the ways that you might be trapped in a slavery of thought. And when someone identifies a blind spot of yours, listen to them and thank them. They just might help you escape modern Egypt. Chag Sameach and Shabbat Shalom.
Thank you, Kevin, and beautiful Devar Torah, and so true. The movie Social Dilemma that you mentioned, I made my children watch it twice. It was such a good movie, and I think an important movie for all of us to see. If you haven't yet, no matter our age, if you have a cell phone, it's a movie you have to watch, and you realize we really aren't free, and we are losing more and more of our freedoms every single day. So I love the comparison you made with Pesach and Rav and Shmuel. Yeshar Koach, Kevin, on a beautiful Devar Torah. Let us now rise as we prepare for the Musaf service, page 184.
יגדל ויתקדש שמי רבה, מעלמדי ואחירותי וימליך מלכותי וחייכון ומייכון וחי לכל בית ישראל, הגלה בזמן קריב יאמרו אמן. יהי שמי רבה מברך, לעולם ולעלמי עלמיה, יתברך וישתבח ויתפאר ויתרומם ויתנשא, יתהלל ויתהלל ויתהלל, שמי לקודשא בריחו, לעילם מכל בחדה ושירתה, תושבחתה ונחמתה, Damiran be'alma ve'yimeru. Amen. Join together, page 343, the special Amidah for the Chag. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu ve'Elohei Avoteinu, Elohei Avraham, Elohei Yitzchak ve'Elohei Yaakov, Elohei Sarah, Elohei Rivka, Elohei Rachel, Elohei Leah, Ha'el HaGadol HaGibor Ba'anora El Elyon, Gomel Chasadim Tovim Mekonei HaKol, Vezocher Chasdei Avot, ומביא גואל לבני בניהם למען שמו באהבה. מלך חוזר ופוקד ומושיע ומגן, ברוך אתה אדוני, מגן אברהם ופוקד שרה. אתה גיבור לעולם אדוני, מחיים איתי אתה, רב להושיע. מחלקי חיים בחסד, בחיי מתים ברחמים רבים, סומך נופלים ולופי חורים, ומתיר אסורים, ומקיים אמונתו לשני עפר. מי כמוך בגבורות ומי דומה לך, מלך ממית ומחיה ומצמיח ישועה, ונאמן אתה לחיות מתים. ברוך אתה אדוני, מחיי המתים. 345 נעריצך ונקדישך כסוד שיח שרפי קודש, המקדישים שמך בקודש, ככתוב על יד נביאך, וקרא זה אל זה ואמר, קדוש 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 אדוני צבאות, מלך כל הארץ כבודו. כבודו מלא עולם, משרתיו שואלים זה לזה, איה מקום כבודו. לעומתם לעומתם ברוך יאמרו, ברוך כבוד אדוני ממקומו. ממקומו ממקומו הוא יפן ברחמים ויחונם, המייחדים מייחדים שמו. ערב ערב הבוקר בכל יום תמיד, פעמיים באהבה שמה אומרים, שמה ישראל אדוני אלוהינו אדוני אחד, הוא אלוהינו אבינו, הוא מלכנו ומושיענו, והוא ישמיענו, ישמיענו ברחמיו. שנית, שנית, שנית ליהני כל חי, להיות לכם לאלוהים. ובדברי קודשך כתוב לאמור, ימלוך אדוני לעולם, אלוהיך ציון לדור ודור. הללויה. לדבר דור נרגי גודלך, ולנצח נצחים קדושתך נקדיש. ושבחך עלינו מפינו להם ושלעולם ועד, כי אל מלך גדול וקדוש אתה, ברוך אתה אדוני האל הקדוש. We continue silently, pages 346 through 354. Please be seated as you conclude the Amidah. We continue with Kaddish Shalem. Yikadal vitkalash meraba, ve'almad yivlach chirutei, ve'al michmal chutei, ve'chayachon ve'mechon ve'chalchon ve'Yisrael. Hagala bizman kariv, ve'imeru amen. Yehi shmei rabba mevarach, le'alam ulal me'almaya, yitbarach, v'yishtabach, v'yitbar, v'yitruman, v'yitnasei, v'yitadar, v'yitalei, v'yitalal, shemei lekudesha, v'richu, לעילם יקום אחד ושירתה, ושבחתה ונחמתה, לאמירם בעלמא ויאמרו, אמן. תתקבל צלותנו וברכותינו לכל ישראל, קודם אבוני בשמיה ויאמרו, אמן. יהי שלום הרב אמן שמיה, וחיים עלינו על כל ישראל, ויאמרו, אמן. עושה שלום במרומיו, ויעשה שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל, ויאמרו, Amen. Page 204, we join together in Ein Keloheinu. Ein Keloheinu, Ein Kadonenu, Ein Kemalkeinu, Ein Kamoshienu, Micheloheinu, Michadonenu, Michemalkeinu, Michem Moshienu. Lai, 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 la, 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 Nodel Eloheinu, Nodel Adonenu, Nodel Malkeinu, Nodel Moshienu, Baruch Eloheinu, Baruch Adonenu, Baruch Malkeinu, Baruch Moshienu. Lai, 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 la, 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 la. Atahu Eloheinu, Atahu Adonenu, Atahu Malkeinu, Atahu Moshienu, Atahu Shehiktiru Avoteinu Lefanecha Ektoret Hasamim. We rise for Aleinu, page 205. עלינו לשבח לאדון הכל, לתת גדולה ליוצר בראשית, שלא עשנו כגויי הארצות, ולא שמנו כמשפחות האדמה, שלא שם חלקנו כהם, וגורלנו ככל המונם, ואנחנו קוראים ומשתחווים ומודים, לפני מלך מלכי המלכים, הקדוש ברוך הוא. שהוא נוטה שמיים ויוסד הארץ, ומשה וקרוב השמיים ממעל, ושכינתו זו בגובה מרומים. הוא אלוהינו אלוהינו, אמת מלכנו אפס זולתו, ככתוב בתורתו, וידעת היום והשבות אל לבביך, כי אדוני הוא האלוהים בשמיים ממעל ועל הארץ מתחת עינו. ונאמר והיה אדוני למלך על כל הארץ היום ההוא יהיה אדוני אחד, ושמו אחד.
Now we've had all those in mourning and all those observing a yurtzeit to remain standing for the words of the mourner's Kaddish, which can be found in our prayer books on page 207. Yitgadal v'yikadash shemei rabbah, v'yalma divrach yirtei v'yamlik malchutei, V'chayechon v'yomechon v'kayeh dekol beit Yisrael ba'agala v'zman kari v'yemru amen. Yehi shmei rabba mevorach leolam omeamaya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitba'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh v'yitadar v'yitaleh v'yitalal shemei dekudusha b'richu. Le'ela min kol berchata v'shirata tishbechata v'nechemata damiram v'yama v'yimru amen. Yehi shlama rabba min shemaya v'chayim aleinu v'yakol Yisrael v'yimru amen. Osei shalom b'mromav hu ya'aseh shalom aleinu v'yakol Yisrael v'yimru amen. I want to thank all those who participated in our service this morning. Corby, it was a pleasure to hear you playing Torah, and I want to congratulate you on becoming an incoming board member. You'll be part of our synagogue board in just a few weeks. And that brings me, Irina, it's great to see you. I haven't seen you in a while. It's good to have you here at Shul also, and you also will be a new member of our board. So it's great to have the two of you here. And Aaron, it's great to have you back as one of our Gabbayim. I think it's been since the beginning of the pandemic since I've seen you. So it's been over a year. So it's good to have our Gabbai team back. So Aaron, great to have you, of course, with Mitch and Alan, so thank you. And Eli Yeshkoach again on the Ashrei did a beautiful job, and we're looking forward to celebrating with you and your family next Shabbat as you become a bar mitzvah. So Mazel Tov again. We're looking forward to picking up at our B'nai Mitzvah. It's been almost a month. And beginning next week, we have a bar mitzvah almost every week through mid-June. So we're looking forward to that. And you'll start it up again, Eli. And speaking of services, starting now, based on the recommendations from our medical advisors, you no longer need to register for services unless it's a Friday night. Friday nights, we still need registration. That's our largest service. But we are allowing up to 135 people here in our Barg sanctuary. And for all our other services, you no longer need to register. And so we'd love to see you tomorrow morning for Yisker. It's the last day of Passover, the 8th day. We'll have two services here in the Barg sanctuary, beginning at 9:30 a.m., and in the Greenfield Chapel community in the Freeman Levitt Sanctuary at 8:30 a.m. And that's again tomorrow morning. Just come. We'd love to see you. And one other announcement at the end of this month, on April 25th, we'll be having our congregational annual meeting. We're excited to welcome David Stein as our new president. And we'll also have an opportunity to thank Jared Bloom for all the tremendous work he has done during his tenure. We'd love for you to include a message or photo for Jared and his family in a tribute book that we're now preparing. Just go to our website. It's very easy to do to find out more about the meeting and to say thank you to Jared. This meeting will be in person on April 25th at 4 p.m. here in the Barg Sanctuary. We'd love to see you for that annual meeting again at the end of this month. At the conclusion of our service, we'll be joining the cantor, and all of us are welcome to go to the Sukkah courtyard to enjoy some treats, some matzah, and we'll say Kiddush in the Sukkah courtyard. And with that, we're now ready to bring our service to a close. Adon Olam, page 211.
Adon Olam asher malach b'terem kol yitzir nivra le'ed nasa v'chefzo kol azai melech shmo nikra ve'achari kichlot hakol levado yimloch nora ve'hu haya ve'hu hove ve'hu yiyeh betifhara ve'hu echad ve'ein sheni lehamshilo lehachmira ve'li reishit ve'li tachlit ve'lo ha'oz ve'hamisra ve'hu v'li v'chago ali בצור חברי ועת שרה, והוא ניסי ומנוסי, מנת כוסי ביום אקרא, בידו אפקיד רוחי. בעת אישן והעירה, עם רוחי גבייתי, אדוני לי ולא Shabbat Shalom, Chag Sameach.
Hello. My goodness, we got a whole team now. Yeah, well, what I need is new gabayim because they put the Torahs in the wrong place. Here. All right, come up with me. Well, I got a lot of help, you see, so, it's going fine.
Yeah, right.
Just hold it still. I love the Antefusach. I can't get enough of it. I keep seeing it.
Do you want it?
Yeah, I don't think I ever heard you do Musaf on Yom Tov, so I can't testify to
Can't do
Rabbi
that.
Peretz that,
Nor would I ask you to.
well, I'll bet you could, though.
I could, but I wouldn't.
Probably could do better than Arthur today.
Oh, no.
Arthur has a very nice voice, but it's probably been a while since he did Yom Tov Musaf.
Who normally does it?
Usually it's either me or Michael, but sometimes I'm not there in time.
I have, when we get the chance, I have to ask you a couple questions about what it's like to be a rabbi at, or what it was like to be a rabbi at a non-egalitarian service.
In a
Egalitarian service. It's like, that's for a later time, I think.
How are we doing here? We have a ways to go, I think. Yeah, we're almost to Pinchas. Here's my kanna.
There's a song for this?
Sure. I mean, there isn't actually one, but
I'm sure there's a song for everything.
okay, here we are, Cobra.
All right.
This is your final exam, actually. If you can get that through the holes.
Got it. Can I be a rabbi now? Can I be a rabbi?